by Zelia Barbosa. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we talk to Dave Zirin about the opening of the Olympics, talk about other athletes you're following, but start off by talking about what's happening with Russia right now. How many Russian athletes have been banned? Is it something like 118?
Yeah, that's right. And in each federation now gets to judge which Russian athletes get to compete and which Russian athletes don't get to compete. And this is so interesting because it's very difficult to separate what's happening right now with Russia in the Olympics with a lot of the anti-Putin, anti-Russia hysteria that's become so linked with Donald Trump in these elections. I mean, you look at the coverage, and if you look at the pressure that was put on the International Olympic Committee by the West to ban Russia wholesale, and just not even have their flag fly at the Olympic Games. And it is because there is credible evidence that Russia ran an entire state-run doping operation. But the problem of what this is exposed is that the International Olympic Committee is an utterly untransparent cartel. I mean, it is a 19th century organization in a WikiLeaks world. And that's just not going to be acceptable going forward. So they have produced this report where Russia has no rights to appeal, no rights to even look at the evidence that's been presented, and is presented as fiat for the judgment of Thomas Bach, the head of the International Olympic Committee. And what Bach has said is he's delivered an opinion that's the equivalent of "it tastes like chicken." Like, it doesn't really satisfy anybody, because what it's done is it's effectively put a scarlet S on the chests of all Russian athletes, and at the end it's banned all of the Russian officials from even coming to the Olympics. But at the same time, he didn't do the kind of wholesale ban, the wholesale nationwide condemnation, because he said that collective punishment is against the Olympic ethos. And so now we have situations where in some events there will be Russian participation, like in swimming. In other events, like the entire Paralympics, there'll be no Russian participation. And it's been left up really to the political intricacies of every individual federation themselves as they govern their sport. And by the way, they're trying to figure all of this out in real time as I'm talking to you, Amy. Like, these decisions haven't been made yet, and the Olympics are already officially underway. So it is a mess, and it's exposing that the IOC has no consistent policy on performance-enhancing drugs, no way to control them, and no way to really resist the kinds of broader geopolitical pressures that are put on the Olympic movement.
So there are 118 Russian athletes banned, but there are over, 400 Russian athletes. So most will be in the Olympics.
Right, but there's no real way of understanding how many of the ones that are competing might be competing clean, and how many of the ones banned might actually have been clean as well. And that's part of the problem, is that each of these federations are governed by their own politics, their own infighting, and it creates a situation where nobody really knows what the results are going to be. And so this isn't just about, like, we're seeing how the sausage is made. I mean, this is about, actually being inside the sausage factory and being so repulsed that the sausage itself becomes irrelevant.
So Venus and Serena Williams, Serena, who's spoken out against Donald Trump, are in Rio to play tennis. Explain.
Yeah. They're part of the Olympic team. I mean, this is part of what they're there to do. And unlike some of the athletes who are concerned about issues like Zika, and I think that they're not going to be the only athletes who have something to say about Trump when they're down there. I think that I can expect this to be one of the more political Olympics that we've seen since 1968. I already know of athletes who plan on making political stands while they're down there, whether those stands are connected to Black Lives Matter and police, or whether those stances are directly related to the U.S. elections and a feeling like they have a moral obligation to stand up to Donald Trump. Those are the general things I'm hearing. And I think that's going to be a very interesting challenge for the International Olympic Committee, because they have rules against athletes speaking out politically. And they say there is no politics that belongs on the Olympic field. Of course, they allow sponsors that are incredibly political, like Bechtel and whatnot. like companies that have incredibly politicized agendas. And of course, the Olympics themselves are a deeply politicized spectacle of nationalism and whatnot. And of course, the mere fact that there's going to be something like 45 heads of states at the opening ceremonies. I mean, this is a political operation in so many respects. The only people who aren't allowed to be political are the athletes, other than wearing their sponsors' brands. And I think this is the year, though, where we're going to see that crack. There were suspicions that it would crack around Sochi, around LGBT rights, but it really didn't, except for a couple of quick things. I think this is going to be the one where athletes are going to be more outspoken, and they're going to feel a need to say something, whether that something is about the situation in Brazil itself, or whether it's U.S. athletes or athletes in Western Europe saying something for the rights of migrants.
Dave Zirin, can you give us a preview what you've heard, who might be speaking out, who has spoken out in a big way before going?
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, you've got the whole basketball teams from the United States. I mean, the women's basketball team has several players on it who are making political stands in the WNBA, standing for Black Lives Matter. Now they're bringing all of that to Rio, to an international stage. They stood up to their own league, the WNBA, who tried to fine them. They resisted those fines and said, "No, we dare you to fine us and keep fining us." And they turned it into a big public spectacle.
And explain why they were being fined.
They were being fined because they were wearing shirts in pregame that said Black Lives Matter, that said the names Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, but also said Dallas 5 for the 5 police officers killed in Dallas. And the WNBA said, if you keep wearing those shirts, we will fine you. And the fines, actually, they really bit, because WNBA players do not make a lot of money. Average salary is about $50,000 a year. And so they said, no, we're going to keep wearing them, and we refuse to talk to the media about anything except Black Lives Matter issues, which was really powerful. So they weren't cooperating with the media afterwards except to talk about these politics. And the WNBA rescinded. They blinked. They backed off. And it's going to be very interesting to see if they bring that to Rio. Now, one player in the NBA expressed his explicit solidarity with the WNBA player, and that is Carmelo Anthony. And Carmelo Anthony is on the men's USA basketball team, and he is the elder statesman and de facto leader of that team, and he is down there in Rio as well. It would not surprise me at all if Carmelo Anthony had something to say. And then there are the lesser-known athletes. A name for folks to think about is a guy named Lawrence Halstead, who's a fencer for Great Britain. I mean, he is somebody who he has a Twitter feed, Olympian's Voice, and he has been actively trying to fight and resist the idea that Olympians have no right to speak out. And he plans to test the elasticity, or lack thereof, of the bonds that keep Olympic athletes from speaking out. And then, of course, there's the specter of the fact that the Olympics are actually sponsoring an all-refugee team this year. Then these are world-class athletes who come from Syria and South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they are going to be competing in Olympic events, and they're going to be arriving not under any national flag, but under the Olympic flag. And the whole point of it is to raise consciousness and humanity about refugee issues. And this is kind of like the IOC is using this as a form of public relations. Like, look how great the Olympics is. We even support the refugee crisis that's happening globally, and yet that could easily spiral to somewhere politically that they don't want it to go, particularly if the refugees have criticisms of some of the countries that expelled them or did not play a role in helping them or their families. And this is the trickiest part, is what about the internally displaced people or internal refugees inside Rio, the 77,000 people who were displaced in the 8 years to make way for the Olympic Games? That will be very difficult if Thomas Bach or anyone in the IOC is asked, gee, so you have this refugee team, but what about all the homeless people in Rio?
Well, let's go to Rio. In May, the mayor of Rio de Janeiro, Eduardo Paes, unveiled a new terminal at Rio's International Airport. It's expected to receive 1.5 million passengers during the Olympics, cost an estimated $500 million. Speaking at a news conference, he stressed the importance of the legacy following the game.
The Olympics is an event which lasts 17 or 18 days, with a more intense impact over 1 or 2 months. The real reason for bringing the Olympics to a country or a city is what we can leave that country or city afterwards. a physical, tangible, and objective legacy. I think it is becoming increasingly clear the amount of things that have been done because of Olympic inspiration, which are not necessarily for the Olympics.
So talk about that, Dave, and Mayor Eduardo Paez's comments.
Yeah, I interviewed Eduardo Paez face-to-face for about 45 minutes in May. And let's just put it like this. I was interviewing him in a non-smoking government building, and the man's ashtrays were overflowing. I mean, partly because of the crisis that's taken place in Brasilia with Dilma and the impeachment and the fact that her replacement, Michel Temer, is such a train wreck. Eduardo Paez is basically the political face of these Olympics. He's also bilingual. He has huge aspirations to become the president of the country. And the Olympics coming off without a hitch is a huge part of it. And what you just heard him doing, Amy, is him spinning the fact that so many of the Olympic legacy promises that were made when Brazil was enjoying 9% annual growth rates are not going to come to pass. They're just not. And so now it's, hey, what about things inspired by the Olympics? And it's a way of trying to say that we'll be ready, we'll figure it out. And if it's not great, just remember that we did our best. And I think
We're talking to Dave Zirin, a sports editor for The Nation magazine. His recent article, The Last Dance, on heading to Olympic Rio. He's also the author of Brazil's Dance with the Devil, the World Cup, the Olympics, and the Fight for Democracy. Dave, you mentioned displacement, the displacement of people in the area. There's a few figures that are interesting. Nearly two-thirds of Brazilians, 63%, think hosting the Olympics will hurt Brazil. According to a recent study, only 16% said they're enthusiastic about the Games. 51% they said they have no interest in the Games. But talk about the turmoil in the area, the people we won't see interviewed when the networks are down there.
Yeah, I mean, the people who won't be interviewed are going to be protesting today. There's a large protest planned in Rio for today. And these are the people who have been displaced. These are the people who have been the victims of police violence. And these are the people who the Olympic monolith has basically landed on top of over the last 8 years. And these are also the folks who feel lied to, because when the Olympics came in, they were brought in with a promise that they would be used as a tool to tackle inequality inside of Rio. And the opposite has taken place. As one councilman said to me, Rio is now a more unequal place than it was before the Olympics came. Now, some of that is due to the economic crisis, but people, I think, have to understand that the Olympics do not exist on a parallel realm to the economic crisis in Rio. They have been an aggravator of that very crisis because they've taken out infrastructure funds at a moment when people need them desperately, particularly around issues of health and education.
Dave, we want to thank you for being with us and look forward to talking to you in Rio. Dave Zirin, sports editor for The Nation magazine. His recent article is called The Last Dance on Heading to Olympic Rio, author of Brazil's Dance with the Devil, the World Cup, the Olympics, and the Fight for Democracy. He's host of Edge of Sports, and that does it for our show. We have 2 job openings, development manager and senior video producer. Check our website at democracynow.org for details. And a belated fond farewell to our producer, Amy Littlefield, whose commitment to social justice reporting is unparalleled. Amy, we wish you all the best in the future. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Dina Guzder, Sam Alcoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Trina Nadura, and Andre Lewis, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee are our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Miriam Barnard, Hugh Grand, David Prude, Ariel Boone, Vesta Godars, Anthony Manzo, Karl Marxer, and to our camera crew, John Randolph, Karen Krug Meadows, Anna Ozbek, and Matt Ely. We're on Facebook, Snapchat, Tumblr, and all the different social media platforms. Check it out. I'm Amy Goodman. Democracy Now! Is our broadcast. Have a good weekend.